Everybody, if you've been on here before, you have heard Austin. Austin is the Extension Horticulture Educator for Franklin, Jackson, Perry, Randolph, and Williamson County. Um, just as I said before, just make sure you're on mute or your video is off, which for me, it's in the left-hand corner. There's a button that it says mute or start audio. If there's not a red slash over that, then click it so there is one. There should always be a red slash over it. With that, and put your questions in the chat box. But with that, I think I'll let Austin take it away.
Okay, thanks Maggie, and thank you Katie. So we're going to be building on what Katie discussed and focusing now on companion planting and kind of the topics concerning companion planting. And companion planting, the main goal is maximizing output and value and overall performance of our garden. So companion plants are good neighbors to have in our garden. And it's about encouraging mutualistic, or what's called symbiotic relationships between plants in the garden. And so this picture here, we can see this in action. This is what would be called edible or ornamental edible landscape. So this landscape has both visual but also edible value. And we've also got this companion planting here, this diversity in our different families of plants, different families and categories of plants. So there's a symbiotic relationship here between the cabbage and the onions there. They attract predatory pests and repel pests that are problems for both of those species. So this practice is considered to be a form of what's called polyculture, and that means the raising of multiple crops in the same space, which encourages diversity of our ecosystems, and it avoids issues that we run into when we plant a single crop, and that's what you've also probably heard called monoculture. So this is a way to kind of address the problems that arise from that. And you may also hear this type of landscaping or companion planting called farmscaping, which is kind of a newer term. And so again, we're utilizing beneficial characteristics of plants in combination to complement each other. And so the other kind of benefits that we get out of this are control of insect pests and attracting insect predators. In that same kind of category, we're attracting pollinators to the garden with companion plants, native plants, different kind of flowering plants, and we're adding nutrients back to the soil for neighboring plants. So some plants fix nutrients that other plants don't, so they have that kind of balance and symbiotic relationship. And then if we're using kind of intercropping or even green manures or green mulches or ground covers, we can use that as a way to reduce weed pressure. So let's talk about the practice of trap crops. And the concept of trap crops, the principle of trap cropping, is using pest preferences for certain plant species, cultivars, and varieties at a certain stage of that crop's development. So the trap crop can be from the same or different family group than that of the desirable crop that we're producing. And as long as it's more attractive to the pest, then that target pest that we're trying to control will be attracted to this trap plot, which we can then destroy. So for instance, a trap crop may be selected because it's more attractive to the marmorated stink bugs, which are now a big problem for cucurbits and squash and other crops in the Midwest. So we can plant a trap crop of, for instance, a trap crop of cherry tomatoes in a plot, and just understanding that while that is a valuable crop, we're trying to avoid, or we're trying to divert this pest from our other more desirable crop that we're trying to protect that pest from. So it's a way to kind of move the infestation away from, or to kind of divert them away. So kind of move them away from the site that we're trying to protect. Another example would be collards, to draw away diamondback moths away from cabbage. And another example would be a mustard family type crop, mustard as a trap crop for cabbage. Blue Hubbard and New England Hubbard squashes are also used as trap crops for cucumber beetles in squash cash crops. So these are just a few examples of kind of how trap crops can be used. And I've got a couple reference sites here. See if this will work. So this is, I think I've showed something from Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education before. Pretty good place to start for just a lot of broad range information. This is a quick article about trap cropping and vegetable production. And then we also have another link here to look at. And this is from a website called the Online Information Service for Non-Chemical Pest Management. And it's a really kind of extensive list of trap crops and crops that can provide other pest control here. So this is a long list and pretty broad ranging, but I would recommend checking that out to kind of give you some more info on what things you can plant together in combination as a trap crop or as a pest control kind of crop. So talking more about pest control, here we're going to talk about insectory plantings. So insectory plantings are going to be plants that attract a natural predator or pest, which is going to then control another kind of issue, another pest that's an issue for a specific crop in our garden. And this is beneficial in many ways, one of which is to reduce pesticide use and just to have overall better yield, healthier plants. So one example here, a really interesting study, is using syrphid flies. Maybe I'm not pronouncing that right, but you can read the paper. And so this is a predatory insect attracted to sweet alyssum. And this is used in an intercropping kind of system where it's planted in rows or mixed in with cabbage and lettuce to control aphids. And there's a link to the paper. It's open to the public. So if you'd like to research, or if you'd like to look into that more, there's the link there that you can follow. Some other examples here are the carrot family. Anything in the carrot, a lot of things in the carrot family attract parasitic wasps, and these are predators to many of our common garden pests. A lot of them are they either target the larval stage or the adult stage or some stage of development or multiple stages. And parasitic wasps are probably the most abundant kind of living thing on the planet. So there's probably a parasitic wasp for every insect pest in the garden. Same with in the mustard family, in the Brassicaceae, they attract parasitic wasps for other mustard families. So maybe use these as a trap crop or intercrop to attract the variety of parasitic wasps and predators for mustard family. Herbs are also a really great thing to incorporate into diversified kind of garden. Things like basil and things in the mint family attract a lot of good predator kind of species, but basil also kind of has this added benefit of repelling mosquitoes and whiteflies. So some other flowers, kind of herbaceous flowers, some of these are perennial, some of them are cosmos. Marigold is a big one. So marigold has a couple different modes of action. It attracts some beneficial soil microbes, like beneficial nematodes, but it also attracts other parasitic wasps, and even has some effects on the soil. So it's a very common one that you see as an intercropping kind of species. Herbs, different herbs attract ladybugs and praying mantis. So those are great for aphids, and praying mantis are a great predator for a lot of garden pests. So another benefit of intercropping that we can think about is attracting pollinators. Obviously, pollinators are really important for most of the plants that we grow in our garden, specifically if we're growing for food. So most of those are going to be pollinator dependent. And intercropping with blooming flowers and herbs are attractive to pollinators. So a lot of times they don't have to be native, but some native plants are more preferable to our natural native pollinators, but it's nice to just have a mix. So consider native plants, but annuals are also great. They still attract pollinators. So kind of thinking about adding value to the garden by using plants that we can use as cuttings, or plants that maybe have some edible value to them as well, like nasturtium. Nasturtium has some insecticidal qualities to it, and attracts certain beneficial insects. So kind of thinking about these terms in ways that we can, and then also extending bloom time. So that's one thing that's great about native plants. Mixing these into our gardens is they bloom all over the season, so we can mix that in and have things to take out of the garden all season. And there's just tons and tons of options for pollinator-friendly plants. Things like snapdragons, whatever your favorite may be, can be used as cuttings, and like bee balm, asters, purple coneflower. These kind of things are more very specific to attract pollinators. So that's going to be butterflies, bees, even hummingbirds. And these also, added benefit of the native plants, they have a stronger association with the soil microbe environment, and they help to condition soil by creating deep roots. So all kinds of good things that we can get out of those by intercropping. And let's look at this from Xerxes Society here. And this is another really exhaustive list that I will share with you here of natives for intercropping that are great for kind of the produce garden, the market garden. So that's something to take a look at. And some herbs that have these kind of pollinator-friendly features are like marjoram, sage, thyme, mint. These things are very attractive to bees if you're trying to get bees into your garden. And let's talk about intercropping. And I've mentioned that a few times. So intercropping is going to be a practice where we're intercropping, where we're planting borders and rows of certain beneficial companion plants along with the main crop. And the example I'll talk about again here, this is a photo of using sweet alyssum, again, to attract that predatory fly that controls aphids. So that's why they have that in here. And we've got added flowers. Sweet alyssum is an attractive ornamental flower as well. So that's intercropping there. And we can kind of see the same practice here. They've intercropped with the pincushion flowers in here, along with their kale and beans in here. So this is more of a edible landscape where we're doing intercropping, companion planting, all mixed in there at the same time. And again, down here, we've got tomatoes mixed in with basil. So we're maximizing our space, diversifying our gardens, and the things that are attracted to this help this, and vice versa. So that's really what we're getting out of intercropping. So we're creating a healthy soil habitat for not only the plants, but also the beneficial insects and microbes that are going to help us get better yield, improve our overall plant health. And by intercropping, we're reducing the amount of open soil that's exposed to weed seeds and other kind of problems. So we're reducing weed pressure there. And overall diversifying our garden, and some really great things to intercrop with if you have extra space kind of over the season are like garlics, onions, chives, things in the allium family. And these work well with many different families of crops and species, and they can provide extra produce and things like that out of the garden over the season. Now, I've kind of focused on things that work really well together, but something to think about, there are plants that species that don't work well together. And just kind of as a primary example, things in the solanaceous family like potatoes, they don't really grow well with other things in the solanaceous family in close proximity. And that's due to the fact that they attract a lot of the same problems, a lot of the same diseases and pests. So that's something to keep in mind, that while we are kind of focusing on these things that do really well together, there are things that aren't as compatible. So that's something to keep in mind. And cover crops. So let's talk a little bit about cover crops. And these are also called green manures or green mulches. And this might be something that you're using over winter. So cover crops can be thought of as reservoirs for gathering important nutrients like nitrogen, as well as micronutrients that are going to be available for the following year's garden. And one that's really commonly used that you've probably heard of is nitrogen fixing legumes. And these are species such as winter peas, clover, red crimson clover. These kind of cover crops can be grown over winter and then incorporated into your soil. So you've got something covering the ground, and that's helping to condition the soil, fix nutrients that can then be available for the next year's crop. And by doing this, we're creating healthy soil habitats that are more beneficial to insects and microbes. Green mulch or cover crops also help reduce compaction and help control erosion. Definitely cover cropping helps to reduce weed pressure. And this ground cover, so legumes, they fix nitrogen in these nodes on the roots. And that is nitrogen that can then be reincorporated back into the soil in the spring. And some examples of other kind of cover crops that can be used over winter, and these can also be used in your rows as well as a green cover if you don't want to mow or you're not using a wood mulch or something like that. But winter rye or winter wheat, even crimson clover, can be used as a winter kind of overcrop or ground cover. So that might be more something you'd look at for areas of the garden that are going to be empty over winter, or just to cover ground, maybe as a way to fix nitrogen in your produce garden. And so that's really kind of a quick overview of the companion plants. And so I will answer any questions. Here's some resources again to check out. This is just a link to that paper I mentioned earlier for the sweet alyssum and intercropping with cabbage, and the Sustainable Agriculture Research Education link there. So I will try to answer any questions. Maybe if you or Katie have any insight, you might be able to give some insight as well. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Austin. We do have a few questions. If you use cover crops like clover, cowpeas, do you till them in the next spring?
Yes, that's one of the recommended ways to get the most out of them. So you're getting the any kind of nitrogen fixation that the roots have done, and you're getting the above ground organic matter mixed into the soil, which helps build soil organic matter. But in more kind of larger operations, sometimes they'll use kind of a burn down chemical to remove them and then till in. But generally, right, you're going to be growing them maybe in the fall or winter and then tilling them in when you're ready to transition to the next whatever uses whatever the next use is for that site.
Okay. And we had another question. What about in personal gardens? Are some vegetables good or bad with others?
Right. And so that's kind of, yeah, and that's there's so many combinations of things. Herbs do really well with many plants. So do alliums, these kind of things. But sometimes things in the same family, a lot of times, don't do so well. Or if it's a structural kind of thing, like cucurbits, cucumbers, they may not work really well with pumpkins. Sometimes they outcompete each other, so they can't really grow well. Or if it's like a kind of a something that spreads a lot, like beans or something like that, don't work so well with other things like tomato or something. They're because they're outcompeting each other for light and get viney, these kind of things. So sometimes it's a structural thing. But yeah, I mean, there's just so many different combinations. But I would say look at things within the same family a lot of times, or things that are closely related, like potatoes and tomatoes. You don't want to intercrop those.
Okay. And I had missed a question. What cover crops could you use at this time of year, mid to late spring?
Well, right now, if you've got open space, I would, and you're wanting to get something out of it. I mean, it's kind of getting to where we need to start putting in warm season things. So I would think about maybe intercropping with. You could still do garlic and onions, those kind of things, but maybe herbs if you're trying to maximize some space, or warm season flowers too. Now would be the time to start. Putting this, at least if you're starting them from seed, maybe wait a week or two for putting out the transplants. But unless you were just going to let it go all summer, I would start looking at flowering things and things that I could harvest in a couple months.
Okay. Are there any vegetables that do not go well with sunflowers as a companion plant that you know of?
Not off the top of my head. This one, maybe Katie might have an answer for. I'm not sure.
I've never heard of any.
I mean,
except for, you wouldn't. They might shade them out. If
there was
too densely planted.
Yeah, if it was a dense planting of them, that's going to shade out a lot of things below it. Yeah, I mean, they do attract certain beneficial insects and things. Maybe with corn, I guess you could.
Yeah. They do attract birds, though.
I was going to say, I know one thing that with sunflowers, if you have a bird problem, you can plant sunflowers away from your field, and then they will attract, if you time it right, they will attract the birds to the sunflowers instead of whatever you're planting. I know that's something that some people do.
Cool. In permaculture gardening, the same thing is this webinar the same thing? Is it addressing kind of the same thing as permaculture?
This isn't specific to permaculture. These are really what I would call best practices for home gardening. And although these practices do overlap into permaculture, but permaculture has some other practices in there that you would be doing in combination. But these are kind of what we would call best practices. So crop rotation, these are parts of integrated pest management. So they all kind of borrow from each other, but it's not specific to permaculture. Permaculture, you're doing other things with composting and layering and these sorts of things, and with that's kind of getting into more perennial kind of vegetable crops that come back year after year. So this is more kind of a general best practices for home gardening.
Okay. And that is the last question we have. We have a few questions here to address. I'll go ahead and just say them. Some people were asking, when will this be put on YouTube? Because there was a lot of information. Hopefully we will get this in by next week. With the email you will get after this, there will be a link to that YouTube page. If you want to subscribe to that page, you'll get I think you'll get updates of when we upload those videos, and it might be easier to find. You can also email Austin or Katie on any of this information. And someone asked about the links on your page, Austin. Is there any way you could email those to me, and I'll email them out to everybody? If you
Sure.
could copy and paste those into an email, I will get those links out to everyone to make sure that they're right, or that they can get them. But
Yeah.
I think that is that's it. Thank you, Austin and Katie. And we got done a lot earlier than I thought, but there was a lot of information in there. So this will be posted on YouTube for you guys to review.
Okay. Yeah, kind of flew through this one. Okay, thank you.
All right.